Beyond having the ability to move the camera around, we also have the ability to create shadows based upon lights in the scene. Let's create a floor and a light, and then take a look at the scene. Create a new floor. Right-click, New, Solid. I'm going to make this solid some shade of gray. And there's our solid. It's blocking everything else. If I change the solid into a 3D layer, let me rotate this solid to the ground. And I'll do that using the Move tool. And along this x-axis, just rotate it until it hits -90 degrees. Press R for rotation and orientation. And for the orientation, I'll just round it off to 270 degrees. Then I'm going to push this plane a little lower. Going to the two views to take a look at our layout. The top view, we have this ground plane, and here's our object right over it. I'm going to scale up our plane. I'll do that by pressing S for scale. Could also do it in here. Just make it a lot bigger. So this way we don't have to worry about seeing the seams where the world ends. Going to the cube layer, I'm going to move the cube down. See how it goes into perspective. There's the cube on the floor. Lifting it up a little bit because I want a shadow. Create a light, and that light will be a point light to start out with. Right-click, New, Light. Going under here, Point. Pick the color for the light, and you can do this later, and turn on Cast Shadows. Click OK. Let me go back to one view. So already our scene looks a lot more interesting. I have the point light layer selected. Let me move that up. And let's look at this in 3D space. I need to see the top view, two views horizontal. This light is in front of this cube. Going to move that light. As you move the light, see how the artwork changes. I'm going to move the light back. Also higher. I'm going to orbit the camera, selecting the orbit tool. I'm going to vertically orbit. Just see this cube. Let's take a look at the cube's material settings. Even though I set this point light to cast shadows, we're not seeing any shadows out here. This cube's 3D layer doesn't have the material setting, which we need to open up to show shadows. Let me go back to one view, and I'm going to lock this view. Right-click here, New, Viewer, and I'm going to double-click on the cube so we can see side by side what's going on. Selecting all these layers, I need to see the material property, and that material property of a 3D layer, when you unfold it, is right here. Material options. A shortcut is pressing the double A. AA will show material options. This 3D layer has the material option of shadows turned off. If you click once, and since I have all the layers selected at the same time, this change will apply to all layers. On. Oh, there's our shadow. The options are off, on, and only. Let me go back to my main timeline. We could do the shadow play. The cube projecting an interesting shape down on the ground. So that's a lot of fun when you're doing art. Let me go back to my cube. Instead of only, off, and then on again. Going to my final scene. I have to turn it on for all my layers. And I deselected my layers before, so let me just resync them. Now it's on for all my layers. I'll select all my layers again. This way all the changes apply across. I want to lift up this cube. Just give a little space. And I'm going to move this. Let me move the point light a little further back. Let's explore some of these options. Light transmission at 0, which we're currently at, we don't see anything. At a higher number, look at this fun psychedelic art that we could create. It's like a stained glass window casting light right through it. So that's what light transmission does. Set it down to 50, half as much, 100%, like it's a stained glass window. Let's go back to the final scene. As you drag it around, you'll have this very cool pattern here. Now also remember what we did a moment ago. In the cube, we could change cast shadow to only. So now we just have this very interesting color, shape, geometry rotating around on the ground. Going back to the cube, that's light transmission. I'm going to set it down, let's say to 20%. So there's a bit of color showing through. Instead of cast shadows only, setting for all layers to cast shadows on. Accept light on or off. Accept shadows only. We only see on the object shadows and everything else is hidden. On only or off. No shadows on here from different objects. So I'm going to keep that on. Accept lights only. On. Off. It's just lit by the natural light of the 3D scene. And on. I'm going to create a secondary light in the main scene. Let me go back to the final. I'm going to duplicate the point light. Control D or Command D. Now we have more light in the scene. And the second light, let me go to active camera. I'm going to switching to 2 views, just so I can move this secondary light this way. Now we can take a better look at what's going on. Switching back to 1 view. Going back to the cube. Going back to the final scene. I'm going to turn off my second point light by just hiding it. I'm selecting this point light. I'm opening up its properties. Light options. Let's take a look at some of these options. That's its intensity. At 10%, the scene goes, well, totally dark. This is an interesting look. I'm going to close this window so we could just focus in on this. So intensity, how bright is the scene? And we could go past 100. 100% is a normal setting for that light. 200, we could brighten it up. Let me set it down to 100% again. Fall off. Smooth fall off. When fall off was none, kind of get this flat lighting going throughout it. Let's take a look at smooth compared to inverse squared. So inverse squared gives us a little more lighting around there. Let me go back to smooth and increase the radius of this light. And fall off distance. Can increase the fall off distance, that softness as it fades into the distance. Cast shadow on, off, shadow darkness. Right now it's 100%. If I set it down to 10%, you just get this faint shadow. Let me set it up to 50%. You can play with the shadow darkness, and you can increase it way past 100, getting this bold outline. I'm going to set it to 80%. though it's a bit soft. And diffusion, you zoom in. Here's a sharp shadow. If I increase this pixel to 10, you'll get that smoothness from the shadow. I'm going to turn the other light on. And none of the settings for the other light was changed. I'm going to turn off shadows for this secondary light. So only one light is making the shadow, and this other light is used to light the side of the cube and add more light to the ground plane of the scene. I'm going back to the original cube, and for all of its layers, I'm going to open up opacity, T for transparency, set that down to 80%. So now we can see through the cube. I'll now open up the material for all these layers, AA, and under light transmission, I'm going to set that up to 80%, and then I'll render out this little scene.